Greetings, this is Griff Roby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with another one of my reviews of an Asimov short story, the second one he had published. This came out in the May 1939 issue of Amazing Stories, so we have, once again, another amazing artifact pertaining to Isaac Asimov. So there it is, Amazing Stories. This time, is the May 1939 issue. And he has another story here. It describes here on the table of contents. So I'll just read it off. It says, "A Weapon Too Dreadful to Use" by Isaac Asimov, page 110. Until the Venusian wouldn't have minded using a weapon that just killed, but this one did more. That's what it did, all right. It's a pretty nasty thing, but it's kind of deserved. Now, once again, let's take a look at the artwork that comes with this story. Nice big 2-page spread here. Once again, we have the first part. We have maybe that's Frantor, or maybe that's something or other with a Prussian name. They're suddenly having to tell all these crashing Earthships that were coming in to attack the main city on Venus, Aphroditopolis. Like Aphrodite, but Dopolis, Aphro, I don't know. It's kind of a subtle pun there, which will be of some relevance. See some of his control board in the foreground, the bubble of, I don't know, atmospheric protection, and outside these ships careening out of control, just crashing all over the place. Because the Venusians have used their weapon. Too dreadful to use. Well, at least too dreadful to use again. Just be to a point where they don't need to use it. So the caption was retreat, he screamed, escape. But the command came too late. Okay, there's another publisher, Squib, that says, "They would not believe these Earthmen, and Antil of Venus was forced to use his weapon. Aghast, Karl Frantor," rhymes with Trantor, I wonder, coincidence? "Karl Frantor pleaded for a retreat. But unfortunately, the people he told to had the weapon used on them." So, by Isaac Asimov, and once again, this has chapters that they don't show in the reprintings. Chapter 1 was called The Ancient Ruin, in which Karl Trantor, and along with his Venusian friend and contact, they explore these ancient ruins of Venus that apparently no other Earthman has ever been allowed to see before. And as they explore around, they find this little room that was, I don't know, apparently the door had been concealed, but now the room is found. And they go inside and they find 5 little rods and an inscription written in an ancient Venusian script. And turns out that's the weapon. And until the Venusian is suddenly realizing he's got an obligation to use it if the Earthmen don't become more merciful. See, it kind of turns around. How many times the story of it turns around the general stereotype of we get an invasion from outer space and they're more advanced than like Independence Day. They come in and they're going to kill us all, or whatever they're going to do, or maybe they're going to, or maybe it's V and they're going to use us for food, or some superior power. This kind of tells it from the other side around. How about we Earthers find another planet with life on it? What would we do? And apparently, when this was written, it might have been thought of as an acceptable thing. We find a number of beings who, maybe they don't have our military power or our ability to communicate very well, or our level of technology or other things. And so they think, oh, these are primitives. And this really explores, I think, issues of, this story explores issues of racism, I think, to an extraordinary degree. And there's really important stuff. And just to get an idea, it's kind of interesting. Karl Frantor actually is sympathetic with the anthill and the Venusians. He doesn't approve of all this stuff either, by the way. He'd like to see things be, more respectful and equal, the way things should be. And yet even he seems to have just some, attitudes kind of picked up that it could be because they are thoughtless or insensitive. But let's continue this. Okay. It says, well, Antill's complaining about poor Venus. 50 years ago, the Earthmen came with promises of peace and plenty, and we believed. We showed them the emerald mines and the juju weed. I have these little things in them that are kind of cool. And their eyes glittered with desire. More and more came, and their arrogance grew. And now Carl cuts in, well, it's too bad, Antill, but you really feel too strongly about it. And so the Venusian comes back too strongly. Now look at these complaints here. Are we allowed to vote? Have we any representation at all in the Venusian Provincial Congress? Aren't there laws against Venusian riding in the same stratocars as Earthlings, or eating in the same hotel, or living in the same house? Are not all colleges closed to us? Aren't the best and most fertile parts of the planet preempted by Earthlings? Are there any rights at all that terrestrials allow us upon our own planet? And Carl's, well, what you say is perfectly true, and I deplore it. His way to excuse this is rather interesting, but similar conditions once existed on Earth. At least he's telling this from some future relative to 1939, when all this stuff isn't going on anymore. Okay. Once existed on Earth with regard to certain so-called inferior races, and in time those disabilities were removed until today total equality reigns. Remember, too, that the intelligent people of Earth are on your side. Have I, for instance, ever displayed any prejudice against a Venusian? No, Carl. You know you haven't. But how many intelligent men are there on Earth that took a long and weary millennia filled with war and suffering before equality was established? What if Venus refuses to wait those millennia? And so you have a situation that is a rather obvious parallel with things that were, in a great many ways, what was going on in 1939. Here in America, but in a lot of parts of the world, actually. It was pretty common. The thing is, the attitude. Now, that's real racism. And I could add, furthermore, true instances of systemic racism. I mean, these are policies. You're this or that race, you can't even go to college. You're this or that race, you can't vote. You have no representation. You can't even eat in the same places or ride in the same vehicle. I mean, gosh, that's, if that isn't, back of the bus kind of stuff, I don't know what is. The commentary is very real and actually very apt. So, but now the Venusians have found this weapon. And oh, is it a doozy. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The editor, Ray Palmer, of Amazing, had a certain habit sometimes of having these little footnotes. This story actually has 2 footnotes in its original. The first is in the reprint you see in the reprints, such as would be found in the Early Asimov, which is where he has all these lovely old stories, because a lot of them weren't very famous or regarded as all that significant. But at any rate, and if the first one had to talk about the Venusian eye and so forth, and it's apparently greatly more finely tuned than the human eye. But it also ignores the fact that there's a second footnote that is not reproduced in the articles. Now, there's a paragraph that's talking about mind-body. In a nutshell, this weapon causes a mind-body disconnection. So you zap somebody, and all of a sudden, instead of this normal human being, you've just got this horrible shell that can barely even survive by being fed or taken care of or whatever. It will just sit there and die if you don't. But somewhere its mind, its whatever, is still out there, full of all of everything we could want, but unable to operate through the body. And there's a paragraph here. While you must know that the brain is merely the seat of the mind and not the mind itself, The nature of mind is a mystery, unknown even to our ancients. But whatever it is, it uses the brain as its intermediary to the world of matter. In the book, it simply continues, but there's a footnote here in the original. It reads, the brain may be likened to an immensely complex pilot room, which contains the machinery that controls the body. The mind is then the intelligence or entity that manipulates the machinery. Author. So, annoying to put that in a footnote. That's just missing though when they reprinted this. So I note the little differences between as they originally appeared and met their audience versus how you can find the stories today. I like to know that stuff. Now, there is, well, they decided to do this, have to use this weapon. And some very, very stupid Earth general says, oh, I don't believe all of this. Let's attack. And suddenly all these ships are, well, as you saw in the opening picture, just going crazy and, as if there's nobody at the controls. Or they're just whatever, going in all directions. And then suddenly the other Earth ships that haven't been zapped with the weapon, or haven't, instead of attacking Venus, are now having to go after these ships if they can to try to, I don't know, rein them in or something. So that's when it finally becomes clear to Earth that these Venusians have something that you don't want to mess with. You need to leave them alone. Now the Venusians, thankfully, are very, very peace-loving, and they don't want a war. They just want to be treated with respect. And at the end of it all, there's a peace treaty. Finally ends. 2 months later, the peace treaty was signed, and Venus became what it has remained ever since, an independent and sovereign power. And with the signing of the treaty, a whirling speck shot out towards the sun, and that was the weapon too dreadful to use. So they got rid of it. They disposed of it. And Fred Pohl was reading the stories. He looked at it, and he says, and after that, the Earthers destroyed the Venusians off the planet. Because, you get rid of the weapon, you get rid of the protection. That's not really quite true. There is a paragraph in the original and in the current printing, and it tells them, where Antil is explaining, tell your fellow Earthers, he's saying to his friend Carl, that Venus is not vindictive. We do not wish to use our weapon, for it is too dreadful to use. If they will give us our independence on our own terms and allow us certain wise precautions against future re-enslavement, we will hurl each of our 5 guns and the explanatory inscription explaining it into the sun. So there'd be something about wise precautions. It would have been nice to at least flesh out, even in a tiny token degree, what those wise precautions would have been. But in other words, it's not like they just said, well, we'll let ourselves be defenseless and, the Earthers would move in and take them over. So it's not really as bad as I think Fred Pohl and perhaps others seem to think it was. There was a very brief mention, but it's an interesting approach. You have this thing. What if we could have something that took care of a situation like this weapon? Wouldn't that actually be a good thing? I think Carl clearly is good with that. He's very good with that. It's like, I'm grateful to this. So I found it actually surprisingly interesting and worthwhile story, all said and told. It has a lot of lesson and apropos for situations today. I mean, people still worry about things like racism, although they're ready to call racism things so, mostly a matter of, maybe bad taste or thoughtless insensitivity, I think. Things that in the old days would have been unthinkable. Would have been totally not even noticed, actually. But, and once again, we have another squib in the back about the author. You didn't hear about this one very much. So at the bottom of this page here, continuing on with the rest of this page, is another little squib about Isaac Asimov. I want you to read this. It says, Isaac Asimov, author of The Weapon Too Dreadful to Use. It all started last Christmas when I was talking to a friend of mine. Of course, the subject of conversation, as is usual when I am one of the conversers, switched in time to science fiction, and I began to declaim on my objections to the eternal raids, invasions, and wars that most seem to think inseparable from interplanetary travel. Being optimistic as to the future of mankind, I insisted that once interplanetary travel was a fact, man would enter a new era of scientific advance, particularly if there were intelligent life on other planets. Why, said I, should an alien race be malign and threatening? If they are scientifically further advanced than we are, they are probably more civilized than well, and there would be no war. If, on the other hand, we were the further advanced, then all we need is a little friendly cooperation. Here my friend gave me the well-known horse laugh and asked me to repeat my last statement. I did, and he said to me, do you really think that if there exists on Venus, for instance, a race of intelligent beings less advanced than we humans, that we would act as benevolent big brothers to them? Judging from the treatment accorded to the various minority races on Earth right now, where all mankind is only one biological species, the life of these hypothetical Venusians, aliens that they are, would be one undiluted hell. Write a story about it. Of course, he was absolutely correct. You're right, said I, and thereupon sat down to write the story he had suggested. So you see what motivated me. He was concerned by that. Another factor that contributed to the yarn was a discussion I got into with my philosophy instructor upon what exactly the mind was. That argument ended in an impasse because my opinion was that it was purely a mechanical thing of almost infinite complexity, while his opinion was so abstruse as to go over my head. However, it set me to thinking, and so it served its purpose. Still, I hope I was right the first time. It would be much nicer if we all did get along together, if we all did come to realize that there is room enough on this Earth, and later on in this solar system, for everybody. Well, like the title of one of his books says, Earth is room enough. Okay. Maybe someday there will come a day when that will be realized. Isaac Asimov, Brooklyn, New York. So actually, I think this is a surprisingly apropos and interesting story for these days, with a good relevance and it's a reasonable yarn. So that's what I have to say for that one, and thanks for listening. Next, we'll have another story that he got in astounding science fiction. All right, be back with you then.